This video we're going to use a numeric array. We are going to define how many elements that are going to be in the array, and we're going to calculate the sum of all the elements, and we're going to get the actual average of the elements. So I'm putting my name up top here, if it lets me. And this program will input numbers into an integer array, calculate the sum, and of course I don't spell very well, and average of the elements. So we can get rid of this, blah, 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 blah. All right. So now what we're going to do, and I'll get rid of all this stuff here. We don't really need this. We're going to create a size of an array. So what we want to do is a constant integer array size. And let's just make it 5 for right now. And now we need to declare an actual array. So we're going to do integer, and then we'll call it numbers. We're putting square brackets, and now basically we're saying we need to determine how many numbers we're going to allow in this array. So we're just going to choose array size. So what that means is we now have an array that's numbers of 0, numbers of 1, numbers of 2, numbers of 3, numbers of 4, and numbers of 5. Actually, of 4, sorry. Remember, that starts at 0, so it would go from 0 to 4. So we're going to put in a for loop, integer I less than array size, and I am missing one thing, and I plus plus. So we need to, for integer I equals 0. So we want to make sure that we're starting at 0, because the way it works is when you declare an array, you're actually declaring the starting address of the array itself. So the array, the first array, would have an offset of 0. That's why you're starting with 0. The second element would have an offset of 1. So let's put in some spaces in here. So now what we're going to do here is we're going to input the numbers. So basically we'll just type cout. What is element or number? Now we have one small dilemma. If we put I, it's going to go 0. So when you're doing this to just give the user a prompt, it is okay to do I plus 1. Do not do I plus plus, because it will actually change it. So if it's number 0, we want to actually print out 1. Then we're going to do cin number of I. And that is everything. So this is going to give us 5 numbers. So let us go and run it and see what happens. So we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Assuming it works. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. So now, although we should normally, if we want to do the sum, in here, we normally would just do sum equals sum plus number of i's. So let's do this, but then let's use a function to calculate the sum just to see if we've got it right. So here we're going to do integer sum. And that equals 0. So now, we do not have to ever do anything inside here for sum, initializing it, because it could cause a serious issue. I highly recommend, and yes, I know we just initialize sum to 0. I totally understand that. Just before you use it, you're going to use another initialization just to be on the safe side. Yes, I know you're doing the same thing twice. That's okay. So here we have what is the number. We're getting the number. Now we're updating the sum. So sum plus equals numbers of I. So because we initialize it to 0, sum becomes 0 plus 1 or 1. Now, when we get to 2 and numbers is 2, then this is going to be already 1, and we're going to add to it 2, so it'll be 3. So let's go and just put C out. The sum is sum. And so we'll just do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So we should get 15. And sum is 2. So you want to do things that are simple and check it. So let's do a little bit more creative. 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. Always want to think of 2, 4, 6, 8. Who do we appreciate? So this should be 30. And it is. So now, let's create a function to calculate the sum based upon this. We don't need this here. So we're going to create a function, and that will return an integer, and it's called calc_sum. What are we passing? We're passing the array. So in this particular case, we want to pass an integer. Now this is going to give us an error if we don't do it properly, because calc_sum is great, but we're not passing an integer. We're passing an integer array. So we have to put in the brackets so it knows. So let's create that there and return 0. We don't really know what it's going to return just yet. So we calc_sum. And we want to have sum. And we need to put in the numbers. So this means you're passing in an array of X amount of numbers. It knows how many numbers are there. Now we have one dilemma. We have array size, which is only going to be known into main. So what we have to do is we have to pass another integer. And then we have to, when we call the function, we have to pass in the array size. Otherwise, it will not know how many elements are in the array. So let's add in here and an integer, and we'll just call it size. So we're getting some nasty message. I'm not really sure why. And I guess it's because we haven't, I don't know why we're getting it. Integer calc_sum. Integer size, I'm not really sure what it is, but we'll fix it when we call it. So the sum is not summer. So let's do we have a sum up here? Yes, we do. So here in this particular case, we can do sum equals calc_sum. We're going to pass in numbers. Now we don't have to pass anything, just type in numbers is just fine. And then we need to pass in array size. And then we'll do cout sum again. Do we have this cout already there? So we just do the same thing. And let's see if we're still getting that red squiggly line, which I don't see, and I don't see. So apparently that could be a Visual Studio 19 error. So now what we need to do here is we need to calculate sum. So we're going to do for integer I equals 0. I less than size I plus plus then all we need to do is calculate sum plus equals what are we using? Numbers of I. So let's go and do this again. And we're returning sum, so we're good. So we'll do 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So the first sum is 30, and the second sum is 30. So that's pretty good. So now we can use something to calculate the average. We could do it the same way in here. And, you know, there's multiple ways of doing it, but I want to show you in a separate function. Though, you know, normally you would do the integer, calculate the sum. But the problem with that is when you're returning an integer, you're actually returning two different items in here if you're calculating the average and the sum. So it's best to do it both ways. Now, granted, it's not as efficient, but we don't want to get into that right now. Need to understand it bit by bit, and we can fix and make it more efficient later on. So now we're going to do a double, and we'll call it calcav. And now what we need to pass in is sum, an integer, and an integer. Now remember, we have to make sure that we're not doing integer division. So let's go and create. So we're going to double. You know, how many times can I spell the same thing wrong? So now what we need to do is sum and size. So our simple average is nothing more than the sum divided by the size. But now we run into the issue of sum. Why is this invalid local variable? Oh, how many times can I do the same thing? So now we have an issue. Integer, integer. So here we can't just put sum.0, size.0. So here we're just going to need to convert it by putting in parentheses double. Makes no difference if you're doing the sum or the size. So now we'll go into the calling program. And we need to return the average. Close this sucker up. And we want to see out the sum of the numbers. The sum is. Then we're going to do average. Do we have a variable for average? We do not. So we'll do double average equals 0. Then the sum is, so average equals calc average. We need to pass the sum, and we need to pass the array size. And then we'll do C out the oops, the other way around. So let's see what happens when we do this. So we'll put in, we want to make sure it's not, oh, there's errors, boo. Let's see.
Line 21, double.
Oh, yeah. Alright. Yeah, it does not like spelling errors. So let's do, we don't want it to be 30 because it's going to come up by 6. So let's do 2, 4, 7, 8. So that should be 29. Okay, the sum is 29, the sum is 29, and the average is 5.8, which makes sense. So that works pretty well. So let me put this on pause and ask for questions. Then I will explain everything.